All right, shall we get started then? Hi everyone, I'm Riku. Thank you for coming, and I am delighted to host today's resident member series talk. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathering on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam people. For those looking at the recording, the Resident Member Series is a public event at Green College that features a different presenter or presenters from among resident members of the college. Graduate students, postdoctoral, and visiting scholars share their research or related topic in their field. With that, let me introduce our speaker for today. Tom was born and raised in the UK and completed his undergrad degree in medical sciences from the University of Exeter. He is currently a second-year PhD student in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology under the supervision of Dr. Marc Horwitz. His research aims to further our understanding of how viral infections contribute to the onset of autoimmune diseases, including multiple sclerosis. Today, he will kindly give us a talk titled "The Modern World is Confusing Our Immune System." Please join me in welcoming Tom.
Thank you for that, Riku, and thanks everyone for coming today. So as Riku said, today I'm going to chat about how the modern world is confusing our immune system and sort of go into why growing up in a clean world and a possibly over-hygienic world might be having such drastic effects on our immune response. So for the content today, I'm first going to talk about what industrialization means, what it means in the context of medicine and hygiene. We're then going to go into some epidemiological data that shines some light on the link between hygiene practices and an increase in autoimmune and allergic diseases. We're then going to go into how the actual immune system works, how it evolved, and the context in which it evolved. This will give us some background information to look into our sort of bittersweet victory we've had as humanity over parasites. We're going to briefly look into how our relationship with viral infections has changed. And we're also going to look into the microbiome and how your birth rate might be a good indicator of diseases you get when you're older. And then I'm just going to bring it all back around at the end to say what this all means for the future of healthcare and what this means for the future of our healthcare as well. I was going to say, if anyone has any questions throughout that requires me to clarify something, please ask. I'm happy to talk about it. Yes? I think it is on. Should I move it closer? Is that louder? Is this better? Fabulous. Okay. I'll just keep it down. I'll probably drop it. So before I want to get started, I just wanted to talk about this word hygiene. So I'll be using hygiene in the context of this talk, meaning the societal and individual actions that lead to a reduction in microbial interactions. So the word hygiene is very heavily stigmatized, and in this talk I will be comparing communities based on their hygiene level. However, low hygiene does not mean a population or a nation is by any means unhygienic. It simply refers to the number of microbial interactions they have on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so industrialization or the Industrial Revolution. This is very simply refers to the transformation away from an agricultural and a resource-based economy more towards an economy that relies on mechanical power, allowing us to manufacture things and basically produce a lot of things. And by producing a lot of things, we could sustain large populations. And so during this time, we saw an exponential growth in human populations. We also saw a lot of people migration. People were moving to hubs of these sort of industrial hubs for job opportunities. So not only were we getting a large growth in people, we were getting people all moving to the same location. This caused a huge increase in population density. And there's this sort of little rule in biology that if you put a lot of the same organism in the same place, lots of diseases spread between them. And so this in turn meant that industrialization sort of forced the development of public health measures to stop diseases from killing people and making people sick. Now, countries have implemented countless public health measures. Most of them tend to focus around this idea of prevention. By implementing things such as water sanitation, sterilization of food products, and pasteurization, it stops us from being exposed to these pathogens in the first place. By stopping us from being exposed, it means that we can never get the disease that comes with that pathogen, and it stops us from spreading the pathogen to other people as well. Now, these public health initiatives have been hugely successful. There are these numerous bacterial and viral infections that used to ravage our societies, particularly in the West, that are now reducing on this global scale. However, whilst this benefit to humanity is obviously undeniable, there is this alarming relationship that's beginning to emerge, where we see on a global scale is as nations or regions become more industrialized and have more of these public health measures, we're seeing an increase in this family of diseases, inflammatory diseases known as autoimmune and allergic diseases. So what are these? So both autoimmunity and allergies can be sort of classified as inappropriate activation of our immune response. It's where our immune system recognizes something, mounts this huge immune response to kill it and destroy it when it shouldn't be. In autoimmunity, that target is yourself. It targets either cells or tissue, and it can cause damage to your internal organs, and these organs can lose their function. And autoimmunity diseases are sort of classified based on what organ is attacked. So in type 1 diabetes, it attacks your pancreas. This means that you can't produce these insulin cells that produce insulin. Without this, you lose the ability to control your blood sugar. For multiple sclerosis, it actually attacks the neurons or nerves in your central nervous system and results in this horrible paralysis, as well as vision loss and other nasty symptoms. Allergies, on the other hand, is when your immune system is targeting something that is foreign, but it's harmless. But your immune system doesn't perceive it as harmless and mounts this huge amount of response against something unnecessarily. These are normally biological things, foods, particularly nuts and shellfish, as well as pollen, hay fever being one of the biggest allergies in the Western world, as well as things like animal hair and dust mites. So many, many factors can actually influence your disease development and your immune function. One of the most famous ones is sunlight exposure. Vitamin D deficiency is associated with a loss of immune function and a lot of development of these diseases. Your diet, your nutritional level, how much nutrients you get determines your disease score, and also your genetics, your ancestry and your ethnicity are one of the biggest deciders about what diseases you will face in your lifetime. However, what we saw during the 20th century was this massive, sharp increase in these inflammatory diseases. But it was happening so quickly, it couldn't be explained by genetics or these other factors alone. So why do we think hygiene is playing a role? Now, one of the most famous places we can look at this is actually the Finnish-Russian border, comparing this region of Finland and this area of Russia known as the Republic of Karela. Now, this research study in 2005 compared the incidence of type 1 diabetes between these two regions. The reason these two regions are so interesting is because the Finnish and Russian border are very relatively new, which means that there was a lot of migration and movement of people over the last century or so. So these two populations have a really similar genetic composition. And the study actually also showed this by looking at their genes involved and found that the two populations had really similar at-risk genes associated with autoimmunity. So they're very similar genetic composition. Also, both these regions sit on the same latitude. That means that sunlight exposure is controlled for, another factor that can influence your immunity. And so the main difference between these two regions was their social economic status. In 2005, Finland had the highest HDI, Human Development Index, in the world, which cannot be said for the Republic of Karela as well. And what this research basically found is that your risk of developing type 1 diabetes was 6 times greater simply moving a mile across the border. And they know that the genetic factors were controlled for, and so it's this idea that this environment in which you grow up in was influencing your risk of disease. Another type of study that really highlights this even more is these migrational studies, people moving across the world. And one of the most famous ones is this study looking at immigrants in the 1990s from Pakistan to the United Kingdom. Now, Pakistan has a very low incidence of type 1 diabetes, but the UK has a very high. And what they found is as people moved from Pakistan to the United Kingdom, their risk of type 1 diabetes stayed the same, but their children's drastically increased. Despite having 2 parents who are both Pakistani, their incidence of type 1 diabetes became the same as the rest of the Caucasian white British population. And we see similar studies around the world as well. Chinese immigrants to the west coast of the US saw a massive spike in multiple sclerosis compared to their Chinese heritage. One of the most famous cases as well is African Americans. Now, African Americans have one of the highest rates of this autoimmune disease called lupus. However, they can trace their ancestry back to West Africa during their forcible removal during the transatlantic slave trade by European powers. However, the incidence of lupus in West Africa is drastically lower than what African Americans face. Again, all showing it's this environment that we're growing up with is influencing our disease, influencing our risk of disease really strongly. So why is this happening? So to understand why this is happening, we have to understand the sort of context that our immune system evolved in. So this just provides a little timeline of humanity, although this concept of immunity and immune system goes back way before Homo sapiens were trotting about. This is when industrialization sort of happened, around 200 years ago. And this orange section sort of highlights what our immune system was evolved for. We were exposed nearly daily to these pathogens that just wanted to kill us. They wanted to use us as incubators and feed on our nutrients in our blood and possibly kill us in the process. And then suddenly we had the implementation of these really stringent public health measures. And evolutionary speaking, this was really, really quick and really, really sudden. And it was not long enough for our immune system to adapt to these changes. Our immune system doesn't know what's going on. It still thinks we're in this 300,000-year cycle of having to fight every day of our lives. So every sort of meal we had in this pre-industrial era was contaminated with microbes. Now, to say we were unhygienic is unfair. We had many different techniques which helped sterilize our food in the process. Fire being the prime example. Cooking meats and vegetables did help sterilize a lot of food. And seasoning. The majority of seasonings that we use today, paprika, cumin, have antibacterial properties, and they help preserve food, particularly meat. However, these techniques were by no means perfect, and still every meal we had, every drop of water we had, was still contaminated with some sort of microbe. Now, whilst this sounds daunting, this was actually a battle our immune system was built for. Our immune system is sort of designed in mind that from the second we're born, it's going to have to fight for us for the rest of our lives. And our immune system did a pretty good job of it. For nearly 300,000 years, humanity survived as a whole. Yeah, a lot of us died, and life expectancy wasn't quite as long, but we still survived. And so we suddenly had the implementation of these hygiene standards that, yes, they helped improve quality of life. They reduced our risk of infection and disease, but it confused our immune system. Our immune system is no longer able to do what it's done for the last 300,000 years. So just to get a bit of crowd participation, if people feel comfortable sharing, has anyone here ever been infected with a parasite? Okay, so if people look around, you can see... we can see there's like 4 or 5 people here that have. Now I'm going to ask you guys the same question. Who here in their life has ever had an allergy or allergic reaction to anything? So yeah, if you look around, you can see that there's substantially more of the room have had allergies and have been infected with parasites. And what you guys have just brilliantly demonstrated is something known as the parasite-allergy paradox. There's this idea that a loss of our parasite infections has led to a rise in allergic diseases. Now, we have... the implementation of these hygiene things have reduced microbes across the board and the pathogens we face, but we still experience lots of them. I'm sure most people in this room have had to take antibiotics at some point in their life or have had viral flu or anything like that. But none have we seen such a drop-off like we have with parasites. Parasites are actually very easy to control for because they spread through contamination of food and water. So if we have good water sterilization and food treatments, we should never really get exposed to them. And I do mean this particularly in the Western world, in Canada as well. Now, whilst we have sort of lost these parasites, it seems that our immune system just didn't get the memo. The threat of parasite has gone, but that immune programming is still very much there. So what's happening on an immune level? Now, our immune system has spent thousands of years carefully designing itself to kill parasites, and it produces these toxins that can directly kill them as well. Now parasites themselves are incredibly clever, and they have evolved countermeasures to help them survive inside us. Parasites have actually developed their own proteins that mimic our own sort of compounds. They sort of tell our immune system just to relax, chill out, you're overreacting, everything's fine. Obviously, everything's not fine. So your immune system has had to counteract this. And so your immune system has to become even more sensitive to fight off these parasites, because if the parasite wins, you die. But then the parasites have developed a countermeasure for this countermeasure, where they will then produce compounds to kill your immune cells instead. And so this causes your immune system to form a countermeasure to this countermeasure to this countermeasure, and go on and on. And so you get this huge activation of your immune response. Because parasites have developed these insanely intelligent means to manipulate, hide from, kill our immune cells, it means that we've had to evolve an immune reaction to these parasites that is sudden and explosive. It's got to kill and throw everything at this parasite as quickly as possible, just to account for all this immune suppression and all this immune death. So then the parasites, they vanish, they go, but the immune cells are still there. So our immune cells are sat there, they're waiting. They've been carefully engineered, they've been carefully programmed to kill these disgusting little parasitic worms that are going to come into you. However, they're not coming. And so what happens instead is a piece of biological material enters your system. These immune cells, which have sat dormant, waiting for something to come into them, react with them. It's a foreign biological material it hasn't seen before, and it assumes it's a parasite, when in fact it's just a piece of pollen. And so you get this huge, sudden, large-scale immune response to a piece of pollen who doesn't even know why it's there. And it's a piece of biological material that's also, it's not going to fight back. It doesn't have these parasitic ability to inhibit our immune response. It doesn't produce these sleepy proteins or doesn't kill our immune cells. And so you get this full one-way response. You have this huge inflammation and no anti-inflammation response. And so this is what an allergic reaction is. And in certain cases with certain foods, particularly like nuts and shellfish, this can actually lead to life-threatening anaphylaxis, where you have such a strong immune response that your airways start closing. There is also this other idea as well that sort of complements it, called antigenic competition. This is this idea that actually allergens have always stimulated our immune response, but actually our immune response is really shite at multitasking. And so, yeah, it's aware that pollen is there. It's like, I'll get back to you, but right now I've got to deal with this massive parasitic worm that's eating me from the inside out. And so now that parasitic worm is gone, it's now drawn its attention to these allergens and to these sort of problems instead, and is causing this reaction. Now, what's also happening is that we're starting to see this similar relationship emerge with autoimmune disease. So there was this study in Argentina that looked at 12 patients which had multiple sclerosis and naturally recorded when they got parasites throughout their life. And they found that those patients with MS and autoimmune disease who got parasites had reduced disease progression, that their disease was actually better, they got less symptoms, and they had a more anti-inflammatory response. Now, in my lab, we actually researched this as well. And what this figure here is just showing is two cohorts of mice, one that was infected in green and one that was uninfected in white. And then they got an autoimmune disease. The axis on the left that goes up is just showing the severity of their clinical score. The higher it is, the worse disease that they got. And it's just against time at the bottom in days. And what this figure shows is the green mice there that were infected, they got autoimmune disease slightly later. You can see that there's a delay in the sort of response to them. And when they do actually get autoimmune disease, you can see that they actually start to recover quicker as well. And so this sort of indicates that these horrible parasites, here these are helminths, which are disgusting parasites, you don't want them, they can actually have a therapeutic benefit. Now, I also think this is definitely the time to say, please do not infect yourself with parasites. The helminths that are used in this study lay eggs in your muscles and could burrow into your brain. Very nasty stuff. But it sort of seems that the presence of these parasites is combating our immune response to autoimmunity. So what I've just briefly focused on here is showing how industrialization has altered our interaction with parasites. And this has led to improper immune function and contribution to these diseases. But what we've really discovered more recently in the last couple of decades is that our microbiome and our viruses and our interaction with viral infections is sort of having a similar sort of effect. Now, if you've ever had a conversation with me that's lasted more than 5 minutes, you will know that Epstein-Barr virus is associated with development of multiple sclerosis. So multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease, and this is my area of research. And there was this really cool study in 2022 that basically showed that if the young adults during the observation time of the study became infected with EBV, this virus, that their risk of developing an autoimmune disease increased by 32 times. EBV is now one of the strongest classified risk factors for this autoimmune disease. But it wasn't the presence of the virus. They found that if people were infected with the virus before the study began, presumably during childhood or their younger teenage years, absolutely no risk of increasing the disease. So the key factor there was the time you got infected. And it seems that what's also changing as we industrialize and as we modernize is actually the time in our lives when we are becoming infected with these pathogens. So what's happened? What's the change here? Well, prior to the development of baby formula and baby food, there was this idea that mothers, or the parent at the time, after the baby was coming off breastfeeding, they would chew the food for the baby and spit it into the baby's mouth, which is pretty disgusting now, but it's a pretty widespread use in Canada still and in many places in the Western world. But there's this idea that this saliva exchange was the mum giving the child the virus in the process. What also happened as an advent of industrialization is that we're seeing more opportunities, particularly for women, and we're also seeing improved healthcare and reduced infant mortality. And so our family sizes are massively reducing. And if you've ever met a child, you'll know they're absolutely disgusting, and they spread these diseases like wildfire. And this is because they have huge amounts of microbial exchange. We know that children spread viruses between each other like crazy. But when you only have a very small family, 1 or 2 children, which is becoming the norm, that viral exchange drastically drops, and these children are getting less microbial experiences because of it. So what's happening is more and more of us are getting to our young adult years, our late teenage years, without getting EBV. And then the first time we're being exposed to it is when we're exchanging saliva with each other. So this results in us spreading EBV between each other much later in life. And what's really interesting about EBV, or Epstein-Barr virus, is that it has very different reactions depending on where in your life infects you. If you get EBV as a child, you get no symptoms. It's completely asymptomatic. It just sort of slides into your body and does no harm. But when you get it as a young adult, you get this disease known as infectious mononucleosis, or mono, or kissing disease, which, if anyone has it, or knows anyone who has it, knows it can be very a damaging disease, and it can require hospitalization. So it's so interesting that the same virus can have such drastically different effects depending on when in your life you're infected with it. And this, therefore, might also correspond to this risk of autoimmunity seen when you get it infectious when you're older. Also, another reason why I really like this study, and I think what it really represents, is that this idea of industrialization and modernization isn't just about hygiene in the sense of having water sterilization or decontaminating food. It's these broader societal changes that are affecting how we raise our kids and the microbial interactions we're having as we grow up as a response of it. And this sort of relationship between viruses isn't excluded to EBV. More and more research is coming out linking loads of different autoimmune diseases, multiple sclerosis, arthritis, lupus, type 1 diabetes, with many different viruses that exist. Okay, so briefly I'm just going to talk about the microbiome as well. So, for those who don't know, the human microbiome just refers to the community of trillions of microorganisms that inhabit various parts of your body. And the majority of microorganisms are found in your gut, but they can be found in your skin, and in your esophagus, and in your lungs. And we're basically starting to find that the presence of certain microbes in you, these sort of healthy microbes or commensal microbes, might actually be having a benefit to your health in terms of regulating your immune response and inhibiting the development of certain diseases. So, the microbiome itself, you actually have your mother to thank for your first ever microbiome experience. This is because when you are born through the vaginal canal, you actually gain all your microbiome from your mum's vaginal microbiome. As second you come out, her vaginal microbiome will completely colonize your skin, your esophagus, your gut, and completely go through you. And what happens is you get this immediate interaction with your immune system. You get this immediate colonization of these microbes, and your immune system is working from the get-go. However, what research is finding is actually that when children are born through a cesarean section, or known as a C-section as well, requiring them to open the abdominal wall and bypass this vaginal canal route, that these children don't gain their vaginal microbiome. And because it is an operating theatre, these children are incredibly in a sterile environment. Also, the mother themselves, because it's an open wall abdominal surgery, will often be on antibiotics, and therefore their microbiome will be cleared by those treatments as well. And so you have this child that's entered the world in a sterile atmosphere, and when they do eventually get colonized by microbes, the microbes that they become colonized with and the amount is very different to what it would happen if they were born through vaginal birth. And there's this idea that this might be contributing to disease as well, because children who are born of cesarean section have a drastically increased risk for developing autoimmune and inflammatory diseases, including type 1 diabetes, asthma, and inflammatory bowel disease. Now, I didn't want to come up here and tell you all the reasons why your childhood has ruined your future and you're doomed for autoimmune diseases. But I wanted to really highlight that by understanding these immune pathways and understanding how these immune cells interact, we can actually design therapies to treat them. For example, for the allergy, if anyone here has ever in their life taken an antihistamine, histamines are tiny little proteins our body produces to communicate between immune cells in the allergy response. They basically hype the immune system up and get it all aggravated and angry. By taking antihistamines, they inhibit these signaling, and the immune response drops as a result. Also, if you've ever heard of an EpiPen gives you a shot of adrenaline, or epinephrine for the North Americans, and it causes this anti-inflammatory effect, particularly in your airways. It causes your airways to loosen up and stops the impact of inflammation on these regions as well. And we've learnt this by understanding the immune mechanisms involved, understanding our response to parasites, understanding our response to allergies. We're also seeing this with autoimmune diseases as well. They've developed immunotherapy, which just refers to interfering with our immune response. For type 1 diabetes, the anti-CD3, which just targets a certain immune cell associated with the disease, and anti-CD20, which targets a different immune cell associated with multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, and lupus. And these therapies have been absolute breakthroughs. We've seen significant advancements in life expectancy and quality of life. I spoke to a doctor just yesterday who was telling me that when he, 20, 30 years ago, he ran a multiple sclerosis clinic, 80% of his patients he would see were wheelchair-bound, had some sort of paralysis. Nowadays, he doesn't see that at all. The degree in which this disease is being inhibited and we're able to stop the progression through the understanding of these immune pathways has enabled for drastic advancements in our treatments. With that being said, the current treatment model is unfortunately unsustainable. So we don't treat the underlying cause of autoimmune or allergy. We are literally just targeting our immune response to them. We're targeting the symptoms, which therefore means that people have to take these drugs, these very aggressive immunotherapies, for their entire lives. And with this mindset, we're working against the immune system. We see the immune system in this response as the enemy. And as Bryce spoke about in his agroforestry talk, and Charlotte in her river risk talk as well, that was it, this idea of working against nature is incredibly unsustainable, and the same thing applies to our immune system as well. And when we interfere with our immune system, what we're starting to find is these people are more at risk of other things. They are unable to deal with bacterial and viral infections as well. They're now struggling with infections we haven't had too much issues with as a society, like fungal infections are starting to become an issue. And we're seeing a rise of cancer in these patients as well, because we're interfering so much with their immune response. We're treating an immune response which is already struggling by making it struggle even more. And so there's this new idea of maybe can we learn from our parasite interactions, these viral interactions, our microbial interactions? Can we learn from the past without also returning to it? You know, hygiene has been so good for the development of humanity, but clearly our immune system wasn't ready for it, and we've got to lead it into this modern era in a sustainable way. And one way we can do this is repurposing parasites. There is currently a clinical trial, or a completed clinical trial, that looked at infecting people with MS with hookworms. Now, hookworms are a very low pathogenic sort of parasite and can be easily treated, and they actually found that the treatment helped these patients and improved their anti-inflammatory pathways. However, other angles that are being explored more is instead of having to infect people with these parasites, we're infecting people with parts of parasites. We're taking their outer coat, their outer layer, or some proteins that they produce and giving them to these patients. And we're again finding that they have this sort of anti-inflammatory response. And it might actually be beneficial in the context of autoimmune and allergic diseases as well. And by using these mechanisms, we're no longer inhibiting the immune response, we're retraining it. We're helping it understand that what it is built for, it can still do, without targeting your body, in the case of autoimmunity, or targeting a completely harmless materials, in the case of allergens. Now, one of the most famous ways that we work with our immune system is through vaccinations. So vaccinations just involve treating an individual with a very small part of a microorganism. The microorganism itself can't cause the disease, but what can happen is our immune system can mount a response to it and sort of form immune memory in a very safe atmosphere where it has no risk of disease. Then what happens is when you actually encounter the pathogen later in life, you are able to just develop this really quick immune response and kill off the pathogen before it even has a chance of causing infection. And what's happening is that there is this vaccine being developed for Kawasaki virus B, which is a virus that's associated with type 1 diabetes. Now, if you remember as a child, if you ever woke up in the middle of the night because you had a stomachache, instead of going to the toilet, you just threw up in your parents' bedroom, you most likely have Kawasaki B virus to blame for that. It infects young kids and causes really bad stomach issues, but it's very prevalent in Western world and wealthy countries. And so what Finland is now launching at the moment for the first time is an antiviral vaccine program, but not aimed at the virus. It's aimed at reducing autoimmune disease. It's this idea that can we target these viruses in a healthy way and stop our risk of developing autoimmunity later in life. So yeah, just to finish off, I just want to say that the main overarching thing that we are now seeing is that the loss of microbial interactions has led to our immune system responding inappropriately. This has led to a rise in autoimmune and allergic diseases. And by understanding how our immune system works and understanding the context in which our immune system has evolved and works in, we're able to develop therapeutics that are more sustainable and are more beneficial to patients. I would also like to just leave on this final remark, saying that although the rise of autoimmunity has really led to fabulous international collaborations, and we're seeing millions and millions being pumped into research, which is able to fund the research that I do as well. Parasites and many other neglected tropical diseases aren't gone. They kill up to hundreds of thousands and millions each year in underdeveloped countries, countries that have been exploited and don't have the money or the infrastructure to fight off these parasites. There's this big idea that parasites are a thing of the past. Malaria kills millions each year still, and it's important that we work with these countries to improve their infrastructure so that they are able to improve public health measures, but also help them through this next wave that we are experiencing right now, this idea that they might then also see higher autoimmune and allergic diseases, and instead of isolating them from this because this isn't an issue that they're dealing with right now, welcoming these larger communities to the table as well, with the overarching goal of stopping global health inequality. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Thank you so much for this fabulous presentation. Oh my God. So given that this great turnout, and we want to make sure that as many people as possible can get the mic. So we're going to go with the first round of like one question or comment per person, and then we're going to go to the second round if we have more time. So I think you go first.
Well, thank you for that fabulous talk, Tom. I learned a lot. I'm just curious, so like my brother has pretty severe like food allergies, but also increasing allergies to things like pollen. And he recently had some tests done, and he might start a bit of like an immunotherapy treatment to deal with a few specific plant allergies. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about what that sort of therapy would look like? And is that very different from, I guess, using bits of parasites to help your immune response?
Yeah, so those, they're called microdosing therapies, and they basically work by this idea of, it goes back to this idea earlier that I was talking about, this antigenic competition, that our immune systems always recognize pollen and these plant parts as foreign. And so what we do is we give people very low doses, normally in a localized area, such as in their skin. And this, and you sort of work up the doses over time, and you basically decondition your immune system to recognizing these things as foreign, or when it does, it realizes, actually, I was being dramatic, it's fine, they're not doing anything. And so you sort of work up, and that's what those sort of immune therapies, that's what the basis of those ones, I believe, anyway, from my experience as well. But yeah, those are much more common than maybe infecting people with parasites at the moment, anyway.
Thank you.
Okay. Here we go. Thank you so much. This was incredible. I have a quick question, although I don't have a background in immunology, so I might be a little, out there with this. One thing that I've heard a lot about autoimmune diseases is that they are much more common in women. Mm-hmm. Is that at all related to the phenomenon you've described in this presentation, or is that an entirely different issue?
So I think it is an entirely different thing. I think the idea is that, so as a general rule, women have, those born with XX chromosome compared to those with XY chromosome. The X chromosome, I think there's this misconception that just encodes for gender-related things or sex expression. When it doesn't, it actually controls for a lot of our immune system as well. And so those with XX chromosomes tend to have much more sensitive immune systems, and as a response, they get more autoimmune diseases. multiple sclerosis, 2 in 3 suffer as a woman. Lupus, 9 in 10 suffer as a woman. They're particularly excess chromosome-based diseases as a response. On the other side of that is that those with XY chromosomes are a lot more risk of cancer because their immune system is less functional. So that's why as a whole we see that those males tend to have higher rates of cancer. The only reason that data is skewed is because breast cancer is such an issue as well. So you don't actually see that divide as much, but if you exclude breast cancer from those scenarios, you see this stark difference. And so to answer that in general, what is most likely happening is that the loss of the microbes is amplifying something that was already underlying and something that was already there, that we already had these chromosomal differences in our immune response, and the sudden loss of these microbes has just amplified that difference, is what we see.
Thank you so much. You're so smart.
I just want to say thank you so much for this fabulous presentation. Fabulous has been thrown around so many times. This is also making me geek out so much because this is what I loved in undergrad, so thank you. Right. I have 2 questions. You can pick which one you want to answer. Sorry, Riku. The first one is, so I had a friend who had an anaphylactic reaction to peanut butter his whole life, and then when he was like 15, he just had a spoonful and he was fine. What's up with that?
So, yeah, that's kind of rogue to go straight for a spoonful, but so we do see these changes throughout. Like what we are discovering as well is that our a lot of allergies that we have when we're younger, we also grow out of, and that is something that has always happened with humans as well. There's this idea again that if there's these studies that show the difference between rural and urban kids, kids who grow up in urban settings, they don't really get hay fever because they grow up with the allergen, and their immune system decreases its response to it over time. Going back to Bryce's question as well, this idea of deconditioning your immune system to it. Whilst I'm not directly sure in the context of a peanut allergy, because peanut allergies can be a type of food allergy that we call like an IgE response. It's a certain antibody that we produce that can cause this inflammatory effect. And sometimes they can be lost over time, possibly due to the impacts of puberty. Puberty is a huge impactor on our immune system as well as and we see allergies more high in the immune system. Lots of people suffer from dermatitis or eczema through puberty, and then suddenly they lose it when they get to an adult, not particularly known reason why. And so I guess that would possibly be the idea, is that their immune system is just changing, and maybe there was a risk in hygiene involved somewhere.
You are smart. My second question.
I think FM's. Okay. Oh.
Thank you, Tom. This was a great presentation. I thought when you had this one slide with Finland and with Russia, you then said that we got different prevalences of the diseases in Finland and in Russia. There can be so many different reasons, right, about this. So then I found in your next slides that then you told us really about that inserting these parasites gives you a really good treatment outcome. So it does help. So there's a correlation. So I've also heard about, since the industrialization, we have so many different things in our water, right? So chemicals which are being produced, which are not yet at all analyzed, what they have an effect on our immune system. Like PFAS, so these forever chemicals, for example. So when you hear PFAS, and when you hear other, maybe, or have you read about other research in this direction? And could this be even more? Of course, the hygiene is a thing. I know when kids are not playing around so much nowadays, this is very bad. But could this be a very heavy thing, so a heavy plaque kind of box we have not really heard about because we have not analyzed all these chemicals. We don't even know what is out there.
Yeah, so it's a more question being like, what about, because also the studies I want to show at the beginning, completely right. Comparing Finland and Russia, and also these migrational studies as well, they're completely correlational. There's no causation here. What we've taken from them is that we're seeing this relationship, and then we've delved into it and discovered this immune thing with the parasites. For the second part of that, in terms of parasites and virus and microbiome, for the second part of that, looking into these chemicals, you're right, that we are discovering that these forever chemicals that we used, Teflon is a great example. There's these studies coming out that actually the chemicals which are used in Teflon, our body can't last forever, and they hide in our body, and they might be producing cancer as well. But whilst that is true, these factors are having a role. There hasn't yet to be any studies, as you said, directly interlinking them in the context of autoimmunity and allergy. I have seen some studies that look at general pollution, because this idea that actually the difference between these regions might be pollution, because Finland was more industrialized at the time, possibly than the region of Krajala. However, there's been other studies specifically focusing around asthma that actually shown that pollution wasn't as strongly associated with hygiene practices. Pollution is definitely impacting disease as well, things like lung disease, things like cancer as well. But in the context of autoimmunity and allergy, it seems to be this idea of a desensitized immune system seems to be really important. But I can't really comment on the other stuff too much. I'm not too familiar with it.
There we go. Thank you for your talk. I appreciate, as a person living with chronic illness and an autoimmune disease, it's always fascinating to hear what people have to say. And I'm curious specifically in regards to antimicrobial resistance, autoimmune diseases, a lot of the things that are focusing on suggestions of using parasites, revitalizing bacteria, natural products within therapeutics that are novel to these autoimmune diseases is a One Health perspective that we've really created a human-centric approach to dealing with issues that we've essentially created for ourselves from industrialization and chemicals like PFAS, all these things that we're going to have to deal with. And things in research have been leaning towards resource extraction through parasites, bacteria, through using natural products. How do you address that kind of One Health perspective in terms of immune diseases, which are so human-centric?
So, just so I got that right, it's the idea that, like, is it the more saying that there's so many factors that contribute to the autoimmune disease, or is this idea that, sorry, could you repeat?
Yes, so the solutions that we're offering might be like extracting from our environment, and in the One Health perspective might be perpetuating issues in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And so something that I've always been really fascinated in is this emergence that we're seeing recently of personalized medicine. And instead of treating every single human as a generalization, the idea that we're going to treat every autoimmune disease as, oh, you had to have a hygienic childhood sort of thing, is also damaging, because everyone is very different, and genetics, and we're just starting to learn that from genetics, and this idea of treating each individual like an individual case, and that they're interrogating them instead of using these like tick boxes sort of stuff we see. And whilst these tick box practices are really good for healthcare because they're really cheap, because they allow people to go through pipelines and just tick off, and it works for like 80% of people, but obviously the 20% of people that don't respond. These therapies we see for multiple sclerosis, for example. Also, a lot of these therapies, I'm going to be completely honest, we don't actually know what the immune cells are still doing. We just happen to find that inhibiting them worked. And so that's the other thing as well, is that the therapies, particularly for multiple sclerosis, not all of them work for people, because we don't know why the therapy really worked in the first place. And so it's unraveling that and taking a more personalized approach, for sure. If that answers your question about it. Awesome.
I'm going to be evil and ask a question. Can you go to your slide about all the exogenous viruses and autoimmune diseases? No. You know what I'm going to ask.
If you ask me about human endogenous retroviruses.
Yeah. Oh, there it was.
Yep.
So these human endogenous retroviruses, what are they?
Okay, so human endogenous retroviruses is studied by the Tokiyama lab at UBC, who Erin might be in, is this idea that actually that during development as a species, that our germline cells, our egg cells, actually became infected with viruses themselves, particularly retroviruses, and these viruses inserted their genome into us, and then we've grown as people over time, and we've incorporated these retroviruses. And what we're finding is that certain proteins, whilst these DNA that we have in us can't produce virus, our cells can't produce virus from what you know, certain proteins from the virus are still around. And there's the idea that in diseases like lupus, I've forgotten which one, is it GP70, GP79 or something, is like an endogenous retrovirus protein, is like upregulated in these diseases. And we're seeing activation of these ancient viruses are involved in autoimmune disease as well. Yeah, does that answer your question, Erin?
Amazing answer. Wonderful.
Thank you, Tom.
That's all right,
This
Olivia.
is so cool. I have a question because you mentioned type 1 diabetes a lot, and that's kind of like my jam, so I'm really happy that you did. But I was working in a diabetes clinic during COVID, and comparing to prior to COVID and the kind of 2-3 years we were in COVID, we saw anecdotally a lot more people coming in with diagnosed type 1 diabetes or new type 1 diabetes, or even in general like type 1 diabetes in older adults, which I thought was really interesting. And when talking to the endocrinologist, everyone was like, it's COVID, or it's because of the, I guess, super sanitary, extra sanitary conditions we're having as COVID. I don't know if you can comment on COVID and like what happened during the pandemic and how that could impact autoimmune disease in general.
So funny you should ask, I had to write a paper on that, so I've got some background knowledge.
Oh my God.
So, although it's been a very long time. And yeah, so what you said, it's this increased number of type 1 diabetes during COVID was actually observed in other places in the world as well, particularly in the Lombardy region of Italy, which is famous for being one of the earliest places to break out with COVID. I think the common consensus is that SARS-CoV-2 wasn't related in the same way that these viruses are related to autoimmune diseases. The benefit SARS had was that SARS is a receptor, ACE2, and its co-receptor, I think, TRIM something, 79, was expressed just so ubiquitously throughout the body, and it was also expressed on beta cells in the pancreas. And so there was this idea that COVID could infect the beta cells. I don't think, though, that there was ever enough data to say that it was driving. I think one factor was healthcare, that people were seeing healthcare or being aware of their diagnoses more. And it was particularly sort of, I know, around this time in which we were seeing a shift that actually type 1 diabetes wasn't just a childhood disease. You could get it in adulthood as well. And so I think those were the shifts together. What I can comment on from these viruses that we tend to see is that these viruses that are associated with autoimmune disease seem to be human-specific viruses, whilst SARS-CoV-2 is a zoonotic virus that originally came from a bat, and so it might not fall under this class. It does definitely deserve warrants of further investigation, but I don't believe there's been a huge explosion. It's possible that people who got systemic COVID, that it possibly could have got into their pancreases and killed the beta cells that produced the incident, but I'm not sure if there was any other direct, this is doing this. Does that make sense? Sorry. Beth, do you have a question?
Me?
Yep. Okay.
It's a pretty stupid question.
Go for it.
Sure. Is that on?
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks for the talk. It was awesome. Oh, you can't hear me? What is your favorite virus? In terms of like how clever it is in infecting us and like
So
deceiving our immune system.
yeah, so there's this idea that like, first of all, phenomenal question. Second of all, there's this idea that the smartest viruses are the ones we've never heard of. This idea that they're viruses that are able to infect us and cause no disease. They can hide from our immune system. Because an immune response is our immune system finding the virus and killing the virus. And so there are some viruses that are completely able to escape that. Some people often refer to as HIV as the smartest virus because of its ability to not only infect immune cells, but completely knock off our immune response. And that's why you would subsequently get AIDS, because you can't develop an immune response at all. I personally think EBV, Epstein-Barr virus, is the smartest of the viruses. Herpes viruses in general, I think, are really cool mainly because they evolved with us. Like, herpes viruses are old as Homo sapiens ourselves, and that's why we don't really see any symptoms with them at all, because they know exactly how to manipulate our immune system, and they have this really clever ability that when they infect you, you can't fully ever clear them. They can hide in your immune system for the rest of your life and periodically reactivate and infect other hosts. And so I think those are really clever in terms of number of infections, but there's maybe other viruses out there that are just so clever that we've yet to find them. Thank you.
I'm 61 years old. Pretty wholesome life. When I was 59, I got hit with this crazy asthma. Should I roll around in the mud some more, or what's your recommendation?
Yeah, so I would like to make it very clear now that please do not go eating dirt or infecting parasites. We still don't fully understand it. We're just understanding that the lack of it during childhood seems to be the really key factor. And I emphasize that again. Please do not take that from this talk. I'll get in a lot of trouble. And so I think, whilst I cannot give any direct advice for that, I am not a healthcare person, but I guess you can always have these conversations with your healthcare people as well about stuff like this, being that, like, because this area of hygiene and this area that our immune system is inappropriately activating because of these hygiene practices, public health measures, is something that's really new and hasn't been implemented into healthcare practices yet, really. So if it's a conversation you want to have with your healthcare provider, that could be fun. Let me know what they say.
Hello. Hello. So I had a question about, oh my goodness, I feel pressure. With industrialization and how that all happened, that caused, you said, allergies and autoimmune.
Is it the paradox? The parasite allergy paradox? Is that the thing?
I don't know. Yes? Yes. What do you think is the next big thing that's going to come and, like...
destroy humanity?
Yes.
Cool.
And is there research that has, like, that is potentially, like, predicting that? Because, so it was parasites, and then it was allergies, and so what's happening next?
I think, this parasite allergy and autoimmune virus, this is, like, tri-interaction. I think we're seeing the peak of it. I think because we are only now just understanding it, we're unfortunately the generation that might suffer from this because we grew up in a very hygienic world, most people here. In terms of what's going to be to destroy, to affect us next, one of the things that industrialization has caused is it's caused us to become reliant on large factory farms, and we're forcing lots of organisms. As I said at the beginning, when you put lots of organisms in the same place, they spread diseases, and we're seeing this with cattle, we're seeing this with pigs in this farm. And what this is doing is this is allowing viruses to spread and incubate between these cattle, and then what's happening is that they're jumping to us. This zoonotic viruses, which are viruses jump from us. This used to happen as well in nature, and this would happen every couple. We'd sort of see a pandemic through history once, a big one once every 100 years sort of thing. However, what's happening now is we're seeing once in 100-year pandemics more and more often. SARS-CoV-2, unfortunately, was most likely just an alarm bell of what is to come. We've had 3 SARS viruses in the last 20 years that could all have pandemic potential. It's just that SARS-CoV-2 was the one that managed to break that infectious barrier and truly spread. And so I do think the next thing in terms of viruses that's going to be an issue is the fact that we have these that our interaction with our environment is unsustainable, and we're forcing these viruses to cultivate and incubate in our livestock. And they're cultivating at such a fast rate that they're now going to jump. We're increasing their risk of jumping to us. So I do think these respiratory viruses like SARS-CoV-2, MERS that broke out before, and then SARS-CoV-1 before that, I think those are going to be the next issues because we're not doing anything to stop that at the moment. Whilst we're trying to help with the autoimmune diseases, for some reason governments don't like stopping pandemics. So... yeah.
So I don't know if
So I'm particularly biased because my thesis project is about immunotherapies, and I'm trying to repurpose immunotherapies to target viruses and to see if we can use engineered T cells to kill virally infected cells. I do think CAR T cells, like a type of engineered T cell, have huge therapeutic potential, particularly when the reward simply just outweighs the risk. I think with diseases like lupus, CAR T cells were recently applied to a study in lupus patients. I think there was 9 patients who received CAR T cells for lupus, and all of them had massive remission. They lost their symptoms. It was a really effective therapy. And whilst we may see side effects of these CAR T cells later in life, because it's immunosuppressive, again, we might see their loss of ability to control viruses, their loss of ability to control bacteria, and when another pandemic rolls around, these populations might be at risk of this new source of pathogen that comes about. But again, the autoimmune disease in question is so deadly. Lupus can cook your brain, it can have these horrible side effects, and so it's where the reward, I think, does outweigh the risk, and it's just being aware of the long-term consequences associated with these therapies and working with them. But they are the future of therapeutics, and the impact they're having on therapies can't be even compared to antibodies in terms of how effective they are and the relief they're providing. Okay. Yeah.
He's off. Anyhow, you briefly mentioned livestock and kind of viral exchange between them, and I'm kind of curious. I'm sorry. So even our kind of livestock production systems have become increasingly industrialized. They're not out necessarily in the wild. They're in these confined and bred like herds or flocks of animals. And I'm curious if any kind of like autoimmune diseases have cropped up within industrialized livestock production systems, seeing that they're going through an industrial shift, kind of perhaps parallel to humans. Like, is that something that has been observed?
So like cows getting autoimmune diseases and stuff like that. Is that what you're asking? If we're seeing like livestock getting these diseases?
Exactly, like cows, sheep, chickens.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Name your goat.
Comment on that, unfortunately. I do not know if cows are. It's a good question though, because it's this idea that is the hygiene having an effect on them? I don't think the level of hygiene they are experiencing can quite equate to us. I think, like cows graze off grasses and dirt, if you get me. Like that is going to, every meal they have is still going to be full of microbes, and it's still going to have that impact. And so I don't think we can see that. I definitely think other diseases, I think we are seeing an increase in livestock in certain diseases, but stuff like that's due to their improper quality of their grazing and their livestock, the factory farms and the things that like stress-related rashes or like them going a bit insane and stuff like that. Probably not the best way to term than that. But yeah, like we are seeing that, but I'm not sure about autoimmune diseases. I don't think our immune systems are quite equivocal just because we have social behaviours with us that stop us from going outside and eating dirt. I'd hope. Please don't do it. Yeah, well, we're seeing more diseases come from them that can come to us. Prions disease is one, mad cow disease in the UK, which is just this idea that we fed cows, and as a response, they developed this disease known as Pirons that could spread to humans, which is called mad cow disease. But I don't think we're seeing autoimmune diseases.
Thank you.
Given the time, I think let us just thank Tom one more time.